Good morning or good afternoon or good time, as they now say in Iran, because we are so dispersed throughout the world. It is my great pleasure to welcome a very dear old friend. I have known Ms. Afkhami for over half a century. We began working together at the university that used to be the National University. It has now changed its name. I knew her sister as a very dear friend, and she is truly a remarkable character in the development of the women's movement in Iran before the revolution and after the revolution. And in the brief account that Roma just read, she mentions some names quickly and passed, as she must, because we have a very short time. But if you think about each one of these, they're really remarkable accomplishments. I want to just briefly talk about one aspect of her career. She created, with an endowment from Prince Ashraf Pahlavi, the Foundation for Iranian Studies. In that foundation, she helped create, with the assistance of Dr. Jalal Matini, Iran Name, followed by the stewardship of Hormuz Hekmat. Iran Name will go down in history, in my view, as one of the most absolutely indispensable, most brilliant works of scholarship in Persian on Iran ever produced in the last century and a half. That's a great accomplishment. They also have an oral history, and that's just a footnote to one of her many accomplishments. So welcome, Mahnaz Khanum. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And let me ask the first question. How did your work with women begin?
Well, first of all, let me thank you, Abbas. It's such a pleasure to be working with you. We've been sort of co-strugglers, let's say, in many areas together for many years. And I admire very much what you have been able to accomplish at Stanford, among other things. And I'm so happy to be working with you now. And what did you ask? I'm sorry.
How did your work with the women's movement begin? How would you say the start of your work as an activist for women's rights began?
I like that question very much. Actually, I was, when I was at school in the United States, basically my focus was literature, and I didn't have any particular connection to the women's movement at the time. And when I went to Iran, I started teaching at the university, and in the same field. And what happened was that the stories, the novels, the poems that we read with my students, who were mostly women in literature, you know, tends to be largely preferred by women. And there I saw that women were so, the young women at the university were so interested in stories of women in other countries, especially the Western ones, the English-speaking ones we were reading. And there was always conversations about the decisions that these women made, the lifestyles that they had, certain liberties that for them was more advanced than their own. Considerably, but then also the decision of how much of that would suit them and how much of that, if they had it, would not sort of go along with their values and their traditions and their ties. So these conversations really started thinking, for me, started my thinking on the place of women in history, in literature, in society. And together with my students, we created the University Women's Association to study these areas of endeavor, to study modernity as it appeared in literature, and how would that suit our people. And this covered bringing people from various areas, from religious practitioners to poets to painters to all various politicians. And that was really a fantastic learning experience in regarding with women and society, and brought me into actually formally working as the co-creator of the Association of University Women.
I think one of the people who worked with you in creating that was Mrs. Moghadam.
Yes,
Yes, who is the mother of Hamid Moghadam, and I had the very good pleasure of having long conversations with her about that. And she's written in her daily journals some of the meetings. So how did your work with this Women's Organization of Iran began? Because in our past conversations, that organization keeps coming up as one of the seminal moments.
Well, as we worked with the university women, we began actually becoming more interested in women's issues. And so we looked into what existed. And the women's organization had this very interesting centers in the southern part of Tehran, in the underdeveloped, poverty-ridden areas of southern Tehran. And the women wanted to talk and see how women lived in that condition. And so we started associating with that and with those centers, and also with the school for social work that was created there in the south of Tehran, and trained social workers to work in these centers. So that's how we began the organization, connecting to the centers of the women's organization. But more formally, Simin Rejali was at the time the Secretary General of the organization. And Simin was a psychologist, and the term of work for the Secretary General was 2 years. She was coming to the end of her turn, and she talked to me, for one thing, to see whether I would like to accompany Princess Ashraf, who was the honorary president and head of the Iranian delegation at the United Nations, whether I would be able to accompany her to New York. And she liked to bring women into diplomacy, because diplomacy, like many other areas, but particularly diplomacy, was sort of a really masculine arena. There was hardly any women employed there except secretaries and sometimes translators. And so she wanted to take 2 people, one English speaking, one French speaking, with her to the delegation in New York and bring them into the diplomatic world. So I said, sure, I would like that, I'll go. She asked me whether I would go, and I said, yes, I would. And that's where I became familiar with Princess Aisha. But actually, like a lot of things in life, I think, things happen like accidents, like for instance, my getting into the women's work through the university, through literature. That also became accidental, because when I went to the delegation, again, toward the end of our term at the General Assembly session, the princess wanted us, both me and Sohaila Shahkar, who was also with me as a French speaker, she wanted us to give a speech at the committees. And that, again, was not very well received by the members of the foreign ministry, because this was an occasion where ambassadors could give interesting speeches, and then that would be taken to the foreign ministry and taken to the Shah. And for one thing, they weren't particularly fond of having a head of delegation who was a female. They certainly didn't want 2 young, inexperienced sort of aspiring diplomats to be given the speech. But I gave my speech at the Special Political Committee, which was headed by Prince Sadruddin Agha Khan, and it was on Palestine. And again, accidentally, I think I have to say, when I gave that speech, it's usually 170, 180 ambassadors around the table sitting and listening. And mine was a particularly dull statement, because you had to more or less say the same things that the ambassadors had said before. So nothing very earth-shaking or new. But the session ended exactly after my speech. And the princess came to say hello and leave. Prince Sadruddin came, and all these ambassadors gathered also, because those 2 were there. And the princess herself, even though she was the instigator of this crowd, she thought that I must have been something extraordinary, because all these people are coming there, the prince is coming and so forth. So that must have been something very special. I think it left a real impression on her, but it was totally accidental. And so she paid more attention, I think, to my activities and what I did than usual. So the next year we were asked again to come, and then at the end of the next year she asked me whether I would like to take the position of the Secretary General, because that was an appointed position. There were 10 people in the board who were either from the minorities or scholars, and 5 that were elected, and the Secretary General was appointed by the president. So I thought I was very sort of reluctant, but I accepted to do it because I didn't know anything, you know, about how the system works. I had been outside of Iran since I was 14 years old, and I was just gone back about 3 years. And so, but then I think again, when she asked me to be Secretary General, we were at lunch, and she said yes. I said, well, it's difficult for me. I'm a writer, I'm a teacher. And she says, yeah, well, I understand. If you were a man, you would take more chances. I think women are sort of reluctant to take chances. And so that really got me to worked up to say, yes, I'll take it if I can also teach, you know. So again, you'll forgive me for being...
no, this is fascinating. But I have two questions, actually. Yeah. One is, the School of Social Work you referred to, this is the one that was created by Farman Farman, right?
No, it was the same type of thing, but the difference with it was that the Sackler was more a 4-year, more extended one. Ours right. was a 2-year, and we brought people from the villages and towns and taught them the principal ideas and send them back to where they lived to be social workers there. So it was slightly different in the process.
Yeah. And the other question was, you referred to a number of centers, women's centers that were created in the poorer parts of Iran for women. What do those centers do?
The centers, you know, came again from something that again came out of my lack of familiarity, you know. I think when I first took the job, I decided that a group of us should go and meet people at the different branches in the different cities to see really what it is that they are more interested in, what is it that affects them more, and so forth. And presupposing that legislation was important, presupposing, for instance, that something that happened to me, I went to the Bank Melli, which was the branch right next to the university, to open an account for my own son. And they told me that this is not possible. The law does not allow it. You can open an account, but you can't take money out of it, and only your husband can. And this was just a minor thing, but other people, in terms of divorce, in terms of polygamy. So we thought that's what they wanted. But every place we went, time and again, women said, okay, of course we want to discontinue polygamy or have other rights, the right to divorce. But the most important thing is to be able to support ourselves, because if I get a divorce, what am I going to do? Go to my father's house or whatever? So economic independence and jobs were the most important thing. So we thought that if we have training for skills building, for economic self-sufficiency, that would be the most important. And then, of course, the other things followed, because you also had to have literacy training. Then you also had to have childcare, because what were they going to do without childcare if they didn't have that? So these units, these centers, became a combination based primarily on economic independence, and then on the side with things that made economic independence possible.
So you helped them create a room of their own, as Virginia Woolf would say.
Exactly, exactly. Of course, you know, we also had the problem that because these were in the underdeveloped, poverty-ridden areas of cities, it was very difficult sometimes to get permission for them to come to the centers to learn. So we had to do all sorts of things to get the family and the men of the family to allow them to come. For instance, in places like Qom, for instance, we went and tried to get some Ayatollah's family member or daughter to come so that it would be, you know, okay. Kosher, not very appropriate word for here, but so that it would be considered all right for them to come. But it was also, we also talked to them about other ideas about consciousness raising, but slowly and carefully. Yeah.
Actually, kosher is a very correct word because much of those laws come from the Judaic tradition. Much of the Shiite laws come from that tradition. So Ms. Carr, in a really remarkable, candid conversation,
amazing,
talked about how there was a reticence in Iranian feminists, particularly of the leftist persuasion, to work with your organization. Could you speak a little bit about the challenges, the successes, the failures, whichever aspect you want to emphasize?
Well, at the beginning, you know, actually the organization was very young for one thing. And it was very much focused somehow on charity and welfare and helping others and this kind of thing, which were very helpful, you know, and then on education and this type of thing. So a lot of the elder, more established women with some level of means would collaborate with the organization. But when we, before I came actually, during Simin's and Homa Ruhi before her, these centers had begun to, in a more limited way, to start work and so forth. And there were a lot of people working with us. And, you know, there is a certain amount of mythology built into the things that are said, thinking back to the time. But, you know, for instance, it's said that women's organization sort of pushed out every other organization and sort of had a monopoly or something like that, which is far from the truth. There were at least 57 independent organizations working who did connect with us if we were doing something that related to them. You know, for instance, the women in lawyers and people who were interested in the law, or women nurses, or women of minorities, women Armenians, or Zoroastrians, or whatever, or women who were interested in a very particular area, like human rights or environment or whatever. So there were all these organizations, and nobody stopped anybody from having any organization. But some of them did always have their own organizations, and some of them did not want to align themselves necessarily as a partner of the women's organization, such as the lawyers, you know, and also the journalists. They didn't become affiliated. They had their own thing, but then if we had something interesting happening in their field, they would come or we would go. So it wasn't that type of thing. But as time went on, the more organized groups, whether they were leftists or whether they were more Islamist, for them it became a matter of political ideology rather than the women's organization, you know. So that didn't really affect our work very much, because those groups had a more focused and ideological, what do you call it, collaborators or constituencies. That was not necessarily our constituency. Our constituency was the ordinary quote-unquote woman, the teacher, the government employee, the people working in agriculture, ordinary women. And then, of course, there were others who helped with research or helped with skills building and this type of thing. And I really never, the only person that I ever reached out to who refused to work with us was a very good friend of mine, a very close friend of mine, Tahireh Safarzadeh. Mm-hmm. And she, of course, she's a very good friend of mine, but she just didn't want to have anything to do with women's organization. But everybody else, you know, Simin Behbahani, Nader Pur, everybody, you know, the writers and the others, we worked with all of those. And Merangis herself, you know, as she must have told you, she taught classes at the women's organization and was a very pleasant colleague, yes.
Yeah. You know, I don't know at what time you asked her, but at one moment, because she worked at the university, she began angling for the Islamic post-Iran.
When I first, she came to teach at the university, you know, she was very open-minded feminist. I mean, she had Sufi tendencies, but very open-minded, very strong feminist. Yes. But things changed as we went along, and toward the end, she just wouldn't.
She even tried to emulate a little bit of Forough Farrokhzad in some of her early poems.
That's right.
Sandwich of love.
That's exactly.
You to sandwich of love. Now, could you tell us a little bit about how you became the first Minister of Women Affairs, as far as I know, in the Islamic world, or maybe around the world, I don't know.
Well, I was second in the world. It was Françoise Giroud of France was the first one. And she actually visited Iran, and she came with us and went to visit the tribal women and some of the other activities and so forth. And we talked to her a lot about, the princess talked to her a lot about the position of the new position that had come about. And I honestly don't know how it came about at that particular moment. I think it had a lot to do with because we'd always thought about getting sort of infiltrating some levels of the government, because we'd seen, for instance, that, well, I mean, it's something that we believed in, and later, unfortunately, the feminists in America, especially, negated that thinking. That is, they thought the government is, by definition, not going to be helpful. And just as the family was taboo, just as men were evil, you know. Yeah. So there was a lot of negative thinking about the government. But we thought that because we also had some people who had been in government in other positions, like Fakhri Amin, who was in Undersecretary for Education, others, Bouzari, Parvin Bouzari, and others in our board, in the council of the women's organization. But I think the year of 1975, which was the International Year of Women, where the princess led the delegation at Mexico, and prior to that really helped a lot with Iran getting connected to the international community. And of course we all helped her do that, but she was very much involved with it. I think, and we had something like 12 seminars during that year in each of the provinces. And a lot of visibility. We had a film festival, for instance, I think the first film festival for women in the Middle East and so forth. So there was a lot of hoopla around women and what they were doing, and a lot of visibility. So I think whether it was Princess who suggested it, or that someone else, or I think it must have been her, because nobody else would have thought of it. but it actually got done, because it wasn't an easy thing. And it was difficult for the prime minister, for instance, because he was a very savvy politician, and he was very aware of the backlash to too much visibility by women and too much, power for women. So I think it was that's why, for instance, when I was introduced to the Shah as the Minister for Women's Affairs, I did it in the airport. When the Shah was actually going to Assad, I think, was either coming or going, and he and the Queen were there, and I was introduced in the airport, and there was no press, just one solitary photographer who'd take a photo and didn't know what, but he thought there must be something going on here. He didn't want to, advertise it or make it too big a deal. But it was really a magnificent opportunity for us, and it also helped because there was no other such a position. So nobody knew what was supposed to be done. What is this person who's Minister of Women is supposed to do? So we sort of could create it as we went, and sort of as a possibility, we actually, and because we were also involved with the International Women's Year and the National Plan of Action, we did exactly what we wanted with the International Plan of Action for women. Mm-hmm. We put in all those items that was, in the UN proposal. And so it made perfect sense that women are half of the population. Everything that is happening in the government is somehow connected to women. So there should be a group of about 8 to 10 ministers, agriculture, welfare, labor, everything, plan and budget organization. All of these would basically have to be represented in a committee that would then look at the impact of the plans on the participation of women in development. So our National Plan of Action at the end of that year basically had this in it, had this proposal. And, so everybody said, well, maybe this is how it should be. But it was really a great plan. Mm-hmm. We unfortunately, it got approved very late. There wasn't the time to make it really have impact. But it was a unique achievement. Even now, there are very few places that have anything like it. But it was a very unique thing. Once a month, all of the ministers would have to meet. The prime minister was the head of it. And the prime minister, of course, attended the meeting once a year. But in the meantime, I met with the deputy ministers of these ministries, and we went through the plans and how they impacted women, for instance, new agricultural projects, new labor projects, and so forth. So it was a very solid plan.
The savvy prime minister that she referred to, for those who might not be aware of the history of Iran, is Amir Abbas Hoveda, yes, who served for 13 years and was executed brutally after the revolution by the Islamic Republic. There's a lot talk, and the description you gave about Hoveda's reticent to make much about your appointment. There's been much written about how you had difficulties in trying to pass laws that would make the legal domain more equal. Could you talk a little bit about what you think the biggest accomplishments were and the biggest failures were and why they failed?
Yes, the biggest accomplishments were in areas that had very little to do with status of women in the family. That was the hardest thing. The ones that were very helpful and really easy to pass were those that had to do with our original and basic goal, which was to make women first and foremost economically viable and independent. So it wasn't too difficult to get long maternity leave for women, up to 7 months if they needed it. It wasn't very difficult to get half-time work for full-time benefits for professional women who had children under the age of 3. It wasn't very difficult to get, of course I say it wasn't very difficult because I remember that when we brought this half-time work, the Minister of Agriculture, who was a very nice guy, but very old-fashioned, he kept saying, what, this costs the organization, you know, half time, but we have to fill the other half of time, and it costs money and the benefits and so forth. But since the others had already supported it, he was okay. And at the end he said that, well, I'm telling you something, we'll pass this, but I'm telling you something, if you let these ladies push you around, before long, Mrs. Afkhami will ask you to just write a check and send it home to the workers. Don't expect anything, but he did approve of it, and he also went along, and it became passed. And so these were childcare centers in the premises of the workplace, so that the woman doesn't have to take her child one end of the town and then come back and pick her up and so forth. So all of this was really amazing for that. But the family laws, it was really very difficult. And so we were finally, of course, the original people who supported it were Senator Manicherian, who had a more radical version, and that didn't go through. It was really to completely get rid of any discrepancy between men and women in family law. But Mehrangiz Dolatshahi had something a little bit more, you know, passable in terms of acceptable to the Ministry of Justice, who was always really basically very hard on that. And anything that had anything to do with religion would be, and everything did. So it would become very difficult. We had the version that in '67 version of the family laws, which was pretty good. During my period, we really worked very hard with Mehrangiz Dolatshahi and some of the others in Parliament to pass a more advanced version. And that one still had polygamy in it, but very limited. If there was some incurable disease in the first wife or whatever, and it was possible to have a second wife, but that with the permission of the first wife, and it would be grounds for divorce without challenge. So that even now, the law that we passed in '75 still is more advanced than almost all of the Muslim majority countries except Tunisia. I think Tunisia is still ahead of us. So the family, and I can fully understand, because the family is where patriarchy lives. The family is where that kind of a top-down decision-making, top-down authority, the distinction between men and women, not only is in terms of the solid, practical actions, but even culturally, And then we women have always also helped in that area. We are the ones who train boys and girls, how to distinguish each other, what the little girl has to do to be demure and nice and speak softly and cross her legs and whatever, how the little boy can be out there and do stuff and make decisions. The little girl wears pink, the guy is, masculine. We helped also. So patriarchy is at the heart of the family, and that is also at the heart of all the laws that relate to the, like for instance, your wonderful speaker, Ms. Rafsanjani, talking about the veil, even though she was very open-minded and I liked her presentation, her idea that, well, women have a different type of a body and the men have a different type of a body, that complementarity, that men and women are different and the women actually are the complements of the men. This is something that that still lives everywhere, everywhere, even in this country.
Yes, unfortunately. I know that we want to open for audience questions, but I want one last question from you. You worked as a feminist in Iran, as a political leader, as an academician, and then you have worked as a feminist in diaspora. What has been the biggest difference? Do you sense that there is a difference in the way you work about Iranian cases, for example, or about feminism in general, that makes the experience of diaspora for you very different, discernibly different than what you experienced in Iran for the last 10 years of your life in Iran?
Actually, what I was able to accomplish in Iran with my whole huge number of people who helped and supported and actually did that, it was a very unique experience. It was a very lucky kind of a break. We really, did experiments at that time, but we have to remember this was 50 years ago. And we were able to do things that were amazing. And I have to say that what I learned in Iran, both at the local level, the village level, the town level, and at the international level through the UN, our presence at the UN, and then at the government level. These have been really the basic learning that has helped me to work with these organizations. First, Sisterhood Global, but of course most helpfully and successfully with the Women's Learning Partnership. And there, of course, the only reason that I was able to work with our partners to create this organization was that I had the privilege of the Iran experience. You see, because our partners are from the Global South, and there are 20 partners who decide what we do, who are independent organizations, and they are the ones who get together annually for a week and decide what we do. And so, and they have some of the cultural and economic problems that we had in Iran. And so having that experience helps with that. And also having had the American experience and being stationed as an exile in America helps me understand some of the ramifications of a more developed country and so forth. So in fact, I must tell you that what I'm doing at WLP is bringing out for study and either use or not, depending whether it's applicable, is the experience of Iran. The kind of collective decision making, for instance, coming from diverse areas and then having a shared vision, but then trying to implement it in a culturally adapted context. All of that comes from Iran. Of course, Iran being the vision nationally, but then locally, was a huge difference between Bandar Abbas, let's say, and Tabriz, So more or less the same type of thing, a shared vision created together and implementation locally. So it was again the accident of destiny that that has allowed that to happen this way.
Well, you know, accidents of destiny happen to everybody. Capable people, dedicated people are the ones who take those accidents and make movements out of them. And I think you are one of these people that at every accident, you have been absolutely brilliant in using it to the benefit of Iran, Iranian women, feminism, and all your friends. So I am very grateful that you accepted our invitation, and we now entertain, Mr. Roma will be asking questions on behalf of the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have a few questions, so I'm going to try to group some of them together so we can get to more of them. There's a comment and a series of questions that are all related. So the comment is, despite the attempts to limit the role of women in society, women appear to have made substantive inroads in Iran society today. How do you explain this, given there is no formal women's movement? And then a few similar questions. According to Ms. Afkhami, what is the status of the Iranian women's movement today? Could you please speak a bit about the women's movement in Iran? What are the most dominant challenges that it faces today? Do you think women's situation in Iran has improved in any way? So I'm just grouping those all together so we can get to that.
Okay, of course we all know that at the very beginning of the revolution, all of the work that I've been talking about in terms of the laws and the legal status were completely nullified. And so women were the first ones to join the revolutionary effort, but they were also the very first ones. The Ayatollah came back in toward the third week of February, and in March 8, the first demonstrations was by women. So women were very feisty, very conscious, very driven for change then. And then afterwards, of course, things happened that we all know, and there were very serious limitations on their rights. Of course, I have to say we don't want to glorify the past either, because not only in Iran, but even still today in all over the world, we still have the issue of patriarchy and the differences that exist and the struggle that we have ahead of us. So we had it before, we have it during the revolution, much more seriously. And nevertheless, I think the Iranian women have done a marvelous job. They have pushed back at every level possible. We have the privilege and the good luck to work with many of the activists in Iran. We try not to make too much of it because it causes difficulties for them. But we have done some of it that I can mention is the magnificent movement of the 1 million signatures for reform of family laws. It was a brilliant movement. It was the forerunner for the Green Movement. And it was also very much affecting the Middle East in the Arab Spring. And it still does, because the things that we learned from that movement, the use of social media, the door-to-door actually consciousness raising, the bringing in men, which is not easy, to bring 1/3 signatories from among the men. These are all things that are magnificent. And so we published the book on 1 million signatures in Arabic and Russian, and all of Central Asia and the Middle East. They're using it as a way to organize and to push for rights. So everything that could happen in terms of pushback, I think the Iranian women have done it, and they've really changed the nature of the society. And they are the hope. They're the ones who know how to make civic society organizations. And I can't be more proud.
Thank you. These questions go back a little bit further. A viewer asks, why was it difficult to update the family laws? Was it because of the Islamic law interpretations? And were any laws made regarding abuse and violence against women at that time, or any considerations made regarding LGBT women in Iran at that time?
The problem with family laws, with laws on the status of women, is that it goes, as I mentioned before, it goes to the core of what we're used to. It goes to the core of what is the accepted and the way we live our lives, the way we make our food, the way we sit at the table, the way we go out, the way we dress, the way we work, everything is connected to that. So it's very hard to do that because you're talking about changing the foundations, the architecture of human relationships. In some societies, it is easier because things have changed enough to make it inevitable, such as the countries that have gone into the great development process and industrializing. In some countries, it's harder. But all religions have these limitations. It's not just Islam. We have it, Christianity, Judaism, all of these are very much the same. And patriarchy is just the most essential thing that every family across the world has been really formed according to that particular system. So changing it is very difficult and backlash is inevitable. I think one of the big reasons for backlash in Iran was the place of women, even though I was mentioning poor Prime Minister Hoveyda was trying very hard to keep this a little bit slower and a little bit controlled, but it got out of hand. And that really was one of the main reasons for reaction.
Thank you. A viewer is curious what line of argument you use to attract women of a lower class upbringing to follow your subject issues, despite the fact that you were from a very high class family and had more opportunities and luxuries.
The thing about women is not so much the economic status, although it affects our lives a lot, but it is if people understand that you're on the same wavelength, and you're thinking the same issues. It doesn't matter whether you are from a higher level family or not in terms of feminism. Some of the working women that I met in Iran, which was constantly what we were doing, we were constantly talking to the people in the villages, in the factories and so forth. This economic independence piece that I was talking about, I learned from the women in the fabric factory, textile factory all over Iran, it was one of the factories where women work. So it's how you work and how you learn and how you share ideas that matters. And besides, for some of my life, I was very privileged, but for a big piece of my life, I was, working for $1.25 an hour, putting myself through school and learning a lot about the union and about how to get your rights as a member of a labor union, and all of that helped a lot. But basically is communication. When people seriously think that you and the person you're talking to are on the same wavelength, you're talking woman to woman about liberty, about rights. And if that comes across, I think that you can work well together.
Thank you. A viewer has a comment and a question. They say, thank you very much for the inspiring work. We really feel proud to have had people like you and feel sad to have lost the influence of people like you. A point that I did not see emphasized is the issue of literacy. Can you elaborate on specific measures on women's literacy during your work at the ministry?
This is a very important point. Literacy was the first requirement, for doing all of the other things, whether it was advocating for change in the family laws or whether it was just basically getting the minimum skills in order to earn a living. So literacy was our focus area. But the only thing that we were very conscious of was the fact that women want literacy so that it relates to their lives. So we chose the way of learning literacy, not as something intellectual, but life-related. You know, it's a learning how to deal with issues of life. People didn't learn literacy to read necessarily literary books or newspapers. They wanted to know how it helps their lives. And they have enough problems, actually, the people who have low literacy, they have enough people, enough problems in their lives anyway. To add some other thing to it without it having benefits immediately, it was not useful. So that's how we taught literacy. And also we were sure to bring in ideas that had to do with their faith and with their values. For instance, it always helped to bring in the heroines of Islam, for instance, and the kind of like Khadija, the Prophet's wife, you know, as an example. She was not only the employer of the Prophet, but she was the first Muslim, you know. So this adds the values to it, as well as making the learning connected to everyday life, whether it was agriculture or whatever else, to connect it to that area of life so that it was useful and lifelong, you know.
I think the same viewer has a follow-up question. I think their interest was literacy at the national level. So when you were in national government, how did you address the issue of literacy?
Well, there was the national literacy campaign, and my husband was actually the head of it. And it was we worked not only at the national level, but Iran was the one that created the international campaign to battle illiteracy. And so we were also connected to UNESCO and UNICEF. And so we had a lot of assistance also internationally in formation of the learning and what they called lifelong learning, and how to make that. Actually, that's something that I'm trying to incorporate into our plans for WLP. Lifelong learning, not just for literacy, but for all aspects of life as we go on, you know. But we were doing pretty well. Unfortunately, I mean, there was a steady rise in literacy, but it took a while, and the process was followed after the revolution, and I think it was one of the more successful projects that was followed even after the revolution.
Thank you. I think we have time for 2 more questions. This viewer asks, can you comment on human rights violations against Iranian women and the response to such violations on the part of the UN, human rights NGOs, and other institutions?
Well, there are horrendous, actually, problems with the situation of Iranian women. There is just so much that the international organizations can do. And especially now with the weakening of the United Nations as a whole, and I think the United States has had a part in that, and I hope everybody and many of those who are listening to us now are probably diaspora, and they're Iranian Americans, and I hope that they will remember this as we move forward, that weakening the United Nations is very bad for every country across the world. And so human rights violations, you know, when we ourselves here are not paying attention to them, are not going to be very useful. But there are, in terms of the situation in Iran, I think almost the worst possible legal status for women exists in Iran right now. I mean, there's not, I mean, it's true that our women are brave and they are amazing and they're educated and they are half of the university graduates and more, and they have every kind of success in whatever is either artistic or entrepreneurial that doesn't have to do with the government. But nevertheless, the legal status of women in Iran is the lowest, among the lowest in the world. And of course, you know, you try, you build movements, you complain to the UN, they complain to the government, but if the government doesn't care, you know, and pats itself on the back and says, this is Islam and we're Islamic, then there's not much impact. Because usually human rights reactions work when the government is ashamed of what it's doing, doesn't want to be known as stepping on human rights. But our government in Iran, or the government in Iran, unfortunately, takes pride in what they're doing. They're not ashamed of it. So it's not as possible as much, you know, to make change without a change in the government.
Thank you. This is hopefully a more hopeful question. A couple of viewers are asking, what do you suggest women do who are concerned about the situation of women and want to make changes in women's lives, especially at the public level? How can they help, particularly if they're in the US? Are there organizations in the US they can join to help?
Well, I would just, for one thing, with the diaspora, I would join the organizations of the Iranian diaspora who are trying to connect between civic life in the US and the Iranian participation. We have such brilliant and successful and really amazing people, and if they get involved into the civic life of the United States as leaders, as congresswomen, as local representatives, you know, in general, what we have to accept as women is that we have to get power, but we have to also get power that is different from the power that was in hand before. It's not power over people. It's power to work with each other and make change. So for that, you have to get to a position where you can impact decision making. Whatever, you know, is the way to get there, whether it's in economics, whether it's in politics, whether it's in the arts. If you have a message and join with others who have the same goals, and add the women to it, it's the best way to do it. But with being, one thing we can't do is whine, you know, because whining is not going to help us. We have to take charge and do what we have to do and make decisions be sympathetic and positive for women. And beginning at the local level helps too.
Thank you so much. I just want to pass along, there are several commenters who are thanking you for a wonderful conversation and your excellent and inspiring work. So I just wanted to convey those. Fortunately, we're a few minutes over, so I think we'll have to end there. But thank you so much. It was
thank you, and allow me to thank everybody who's listening. I really, really appreciate this opportunity, and I wish I could see you, but you can write to me, please. I would love to hear from you. And learning partnerships, search it on the web, and there are, you know, ways of connecting to us, and I would love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And for everyone who asked, the conversation is being recorded, so a video will be available on our YouTube channel in a few weeks. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much and have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.